Hi, I'm Mal from the Money Study, bringing you an episode of our Take 10 Challenge, episode 105, and part 14, the last episode in our series we've been doing here over the last couple of weeks on buying an investment property. There's a disclaimer: facts, figures, information only, no advice in today's session, purely general information. Okay, so we might buy an investment property, we might buy 2 or 3, and so it goes on. And of course, if you go along to these property seminars, this is pretty much what they sort of try and sell you, is the fact that this can be a growing procedure. And it's quite easy to do, because all we do is we use the equity from one as the deposit on the next, meaning that you buy a property for 500,000, it goes up to $600,000 or $700,000. Our debt is still only 500. We've generated all this extra equity, and we effectively use that equity to then turn around, go to the bank and say, we're going to buy another property. And of course, we've got enough equity between these 2 properties because we own $200,000 of this other property over here. And therefore, you just borrow the entire amount of money for house number 2. And in theory, you just keep on doing this until you have property number 15. Now, is this a good idea or not? Well, it obviously depends on what history in the future is actually going to deliver for us. In the past, yes, over the last couple of decades, this would have been a fantastic thing to be doing because house prices have gone through the roof. It's just a case, as I've probably indicated over these last couple of weeks, there are issues in the regard that are these house prices going to continue to go up if the governments and so forth are trying to make property far more affordable. So the idea is fine, and of course, yes, indeed, we get our positive income from one. So as the first one starts to make us money, it can then cover the cost of any negative gearing of property number 2. So therefore, our cash flow may be indeed still neutral. So it means that, yes, we can keep on buying and buying, but of course, what are we doing is our exposure to the property market is indeed becoming quite high. And I must admit, I'm not a huge fan of having everything in property and not having an equal balance in things like shares or bonds or any or the other asset classes there. Too much weight in any one particular asset class means that you're running the risk if that particular asset class then has a bit of a wobble. And if you're going to do this, then obviously certainly try and diversify your properties across different regions, different cities, different suburbs, different states and so forth, so we don't have all our money all tied up in one suburb or something similar to that. The idea is, in theory, of course, that as the values go up, our capital value has gone up, our wealth has grown. Of course, our debt is getting bigger and bigger with every single property we take on, but as the capital value of each property goes up, the debt compared to the overall asset value is indeed becoming a smaller percentage. And then at retirement, you would sell down some of your properties to remove the debt, leaving you with properties that are generating income with little or no debt. Now, when I first started out in finance, I was actually working for an organisation called the Investors Club, and effectively they were doing this. They were suggesting that you buy property after property after property, but they were suggesting that you never sold. And even in retirement, you would just use the equity. You'd use the equity to go back to a bank with all this asset that you've got and literally just borrow money using the equity to effectively live off debt. Now, that sounds scary, and it is. In theory, it could indeed work. But if house prices drop and you continually are borrowing against it, you only need a slight downturn in house prices for this all to fall down like a stack of cards. So yes, reducing debt at retirement would probably be a smart idea, leaving us with positively geared property that's making us money. Yep, if it's positively geared, we're paying taxes. Do I care? No, not if it means that I'm making money. There are other ways we can do it. Of course, obviously utilising super up until the age of 75 on claiming tax deductions up to age 67 there. So look, there are certainly different ways of thinking about it. Whether the government is going to continue to allow people to get negative gearing on multiple properties. There's been talk of late of changes to negative gearing, perhaps leaving it as it is, but going forward, perhaps restricting it to 1 or 2 or 3 properties or something similar. So just be a case of keeping an eye on legislation. Whether they make these legislation retrospective or not is anybody's guess. It really is going to depend on the desperation of governments to get house prices to a point where people believe they are actually doing something to assist the next generation. Other issues that we can think about here on property. What happens if you do have an investment property? And of course it's negatively geared, meaning it's costing you money, and then you lose your job. Do you indeed have income protection in place to help you in that particular situation? Do you have an emergency funding to get you through an emergency situation? What's your backup? What's plan B if you do indeed lose your job? Now, you may be in what you think is a very secure job, and it could be, but yep, I remember years ago back in the GFC coming in on a Friday, and it was basically a boss comes in and says it was a case of a don't come Monday, literally because of the turns in the markets and so forth. Things can happen. You need a plan B. What about if your property is vacant for an extended period of time? You've lost your tenant for whatever reason. There may be a reason you lost your tenant. There could be something going on in the street. It could be a change in the attitude of your suburb, the culture. It could be, all sorts of anything that may mean that now renting your property isn't such a wonderful idea. So, do you hang out for the rent that you were getting, hoping to get somebody, or would you rather just drop the rent a little bit to indeed entice someone to get it coming in? And generally speaking, having some sort of money coming in at a reduced rate is better than having several months off with no rent. Could be you get them in on a lower rate for a shorter period of time, so that you've got flexibility to either ramp it up later on or find someone who can then pay it at a later date. But leaving it vacant month after month after month is, generally speaking, not a good thing for your cash flow. And of course, the last couple of years, yep, we've been through it. What happens if interest rates go up? Will your situation allow for increases in interest rates? Have you done your homework if interest rates do indeed continue to go up? 6 months ago, they were talking about interest rates dropping. Now they're not so sure. Inflation still is biting. The Reserve Bank indeed could still have further interest rate rises to go. What impact is that going to have on investment properties? The trouble with investment property, unlike other investments, is that it's very, very difficult to free up 40,000 or whatever you may need. You need a new car, you need an operation, something where you need a lump of money. You can't just sell off a bedroom. And we sort of spoke about this in the earlier sort of sessions, but it really is something that you need to consider, is that this is a long-term investment. Your money is indeed locked up because you can't just peel off a portion of your property. And that, I say, unlike other investments, if you had $100,000 or $500,000 in shares, yep, you could always just sell down 50,000 whenever it suits to do it. And of course, I've got into trouble by a few people suggesting that I'm against property. Look, I'm not against property at all. I love property. I've had 5 investment properties over my life. They've all had mixed fortunes and so forth. I'm not against investment property, but I think it's got to be an appropriate investment for a person with the appropriate cash flow, and also I'm going to say age. Look, I'm not against an older person buying an investment property because unfortunately that's probably the most people buy them because the kids have moved out, they've got more money, they don't have any debt in their home, they're the ones that are buying the investment property. But when you compare an investment property in retirement to what you could possibly do with a similar amount of money in a super fund, I think you really need to do your homework because any income from an investment property is basically taxable income after all the expenses. So if it's positively geared, you are indeed paying tax on it. You haven't got access to any lumps of money, so all we've got is this large investment. It's all tied up perhaps in this one investment. So we're relying purely on the income, on the consistency of a tenant, and we've got taxable income, and we've got all the issues indeed of running a house. Comparing it to have similar sort of money in a tax-free world, in an allocated pension arrangement in super, where it's totally tax-free in retirement, in a pension phase, totally accessible, totally liquid, and yes, you can set the risk level depending on what you want to do. And with interest rates going where they've been going, it's not going to be that hard to get 5% pretty much risk-free in cash and so forth, in some fixed interest and other arrangements there. If we can get sort of 4s and 5s and so forth guaranteed tax-free, then you've got to look at that. How does that compare to our rent after all expenses and so forth? I'm not saying that's what you should do. I'm just saying do your numbers, taking into account what are you trying to achieve over this next 5, 10, 15, 20 years or so as we head towards retirement. Of course, if your investment property is, the idea of it is to hand down to your children, okay, well, yep, that's, the investment property, it's not purely an investment, it's a lifestyle choice for your family. Having said that, money from super can also be handed to children. Yes, they would pay that tax on the taxable component, but even so, it's always a case of comparison. What suits you? What suits your scenario? Been a bit of a fascinating ride over the last 14 sessions here on investment properties. Obviously, really, we've only just sort of scratched the surface. To talk about investment property, to cover all the aspects would indeed take us a lot longer than what we've done. A lot of other issues, but generally speaking, the issues come down to the individual situation, the individual property, where it is, what type, what are you trying to do, and what are you trying to do going forward. Lots of things to chat about, and more than happy to do so. Look forward to you joining me in another session.